Manhattan never really sleeps. It just lowers its voice. At 1:47 a.m., the city outside Kaisung Sun's private office is alive with neon and rain. Traffic hissing along wet asphalt. Sirens threading the distance like nervous breaths. 40 floors above the street, behind reinforced glass and imported stone, a different kind of noise fills the room. Breathing. Slow, controlled, counted. Kaisung's. The gun is so close he can smell it. Not metal exactly, oil. Freshly cleaned. Sharp. Mixed with the sour sweetness of a half-burned cigar, still smoldering in the ashtray between them. Cuban. Expensive. His father's taste. Everything in this room carries his father's fingerprints. Even now, the barrel hovers inches from Kaisung's face, steady in a hand that knows what it's doing. No shaking, no hesitation. The man holding it is dressed like an accountant, gray suit, conservative tie, hair neat enough to disappear in a crowd. But Kaisung recognizes him instantly. Family, not blood, but closer than that. The rain streaks down the windows behind the gunman, bending the electric reds and blues of Midtown into long, bleeding lines. Kaisung doesn't look away from the weapon. He's learned never to look away first. His dark eyes stay fixed, unblinking, reading details the way he was trained to. Finger placement, trigger discipline, distance, angle. This isn't a robbery. This isn't a warning. This is an execution that hasn't decided how loud it wants to be. The safety clicks off. It's a small sound, barely there, but in the sudden quiet of the office, it lands like a hammer. Kaisung exhales through his nose, slow enough not to be mistaken for fear. His tailored suit clings slightly at the collar where sweat has gathered, a thin line of dampness soaking into fabric that cost more than most people's rent. He doesn't wipe it away. Movement invites mistakes. Mistakes invite bullets. "You don't have to do this," he says. His voice is calm, not pleading, measured, the way men speak when they know words are the last tool they have left. The gunman doesn't respond. Somewhere below them, a horn blares. A cab brakes too hard. Life continues, ignorant and loud. Kaisung's mind doesn't race. It narrows. He thinks of the order first, not the gun. Orders always come before bullets. Someone had to give this one. Someone had to decide that tonight, in this office, loyalty would be tested and paid for in blood. His father. It lands with the weight of certainty. This isn't about money, or territory, or disrespect. This is about weakness, about a line Kaisung crossed when he let something soft into a world built on steel. A smile. Naomi Clark. The image flashes uninvited into his mind. Her behind a cafe counter in Brooklyn, sleeves pushed up, hair pulled back, eyes tired but warm. That smile, the one that wasn't for sale, wasn't practiced, wasn't meant for him at all. The smile that made him forget how to breathe in a ballroom full of people who'd spent their lives perfecting the art of being desired. The price for that moment is standing in front of a gun. The gunman finally speaks. "You were warned." His voice is flat, professional, almost apologetic. Kaisung nods once. He believes him. "How is she?" Kaisung asks. "Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming video." The question hangs between them, heavier than the weapon. The gunman's jaw tightens just a fraction. A tell. He's not supposed to answer that, which means Naomi is still alive. "For now, answer me," Kaisung says, not louder, but sharper. Authority threaded through every syllable. The voice that once made men kneel without a hand ever being raised. "She's breathing," the man says. "That's not guaranteed to last." The words slide into Kaisung's chest and stay there. Rain slams harder against the windows, as if the city itself is trying to listen in. Neon flickers. For a moment, the gunman's face is cut in half by red light, then blue, then shadow again. "You tell him," Kaisung says quietly. "You tell my father that threatening her was a mistake." A humorless smile twitches at the corner of the gunman's mouth. "You don't get to make threats anymore." The safety is already off. The finger tightens. Time stretches. Kaisung notices everything in that suspended second, the faint hum of the HVAC system, the distant thud of bass from a club blocks away, the way the cigar smoke curls toward the ceiling like it's trying to escape. He feels the chair pressing into the backs of his legs, the cool marble under his shoes, the steady thump of his heart refusing to panic. He doesn't close his eyes. If this is how it ends, he'll watch it happen. Before you do this, Kaisung says, ask yourself why you were chosen. The gunman hesitates. Just enough. Because I'm loyal, he says. No, Kaisung replies. Because you're expendable. That lands. A beat passes. Then another. The rain keeps falling. Kaisung leans back slightly, just enough to show he isn't afraid of the distance. If I die tonight, he continues, my father loses control. You know that. The streets know that. Everyone who's been waiting for him to weaken will move at once, and you'll be standing in the middle of it, with my blood on your hands, and no protection. The gunman's breathing changes, faster now, shallower. You pull that trigger, Kaisung says, and you don't walk out of this building. Silence. The city seems to hold it too. The gun is raised fully now, aimed dead center between Kaisung's eyes. There's no shaking anymore. Whatever decision is being made, it's almost finished. Kaisung thinks of Naomi again. Not the danger, not the fear. Just the way she'd laughed at something stupid he said over cheap Thai food. The way she'd looked at him like he was a man. Not a monster. Not an heir. Not a weapon. If this is the cost, he'll pay it. The finger tightens. The trigger begins to move. And right before the shot, everything cuts to black. Before we reveal who ordered the hit, like this video if you believe loyalty should mean something. 6 months earlier, Manhattan dressed differently when it wanted to impress itself. On Park Avenue, under a canopy of light and security, black cars lined the curb outside the Waldorf Astoria, like obedient animals waiting for their masters. Drivers stood at attention in dark coats, hands folded, eyes forward. Above them, the building glowed golden, polished, untouchable. The kind of place where history didn't just happen, it lingered in the walls, soaked into marble and memory. Inside the grand ballroom, the city's elite gathered to congratulate themselves for caring. Crystal chandeliers hung low and heavy, refracting light across silk gowns and tailored suits. Old money and new money mixed without ever truly touching, orbiting one another in carefully calculated paths. The orchestra played something classical and safe music designed to sound important without demanding attention. This was a charity gala on paper. Children's hospitals, research funds, the kind of cause no one could publicly object to. But everyone in the room knew the truth. This wasn't about charity. It was about hierarchy. It was about being seen in the right room, at the right time, next to the right people. About quiet deals struck over champagne flutes and smiles that never reached the eyes. About power moving without signatures, without handshakes, without a single word spoken out loud. And at the center of it all, without ever trying to be, stood Kaisung Sun. He didn't work the room. The room adjusted to him. 6'2", broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, he stood near the edge of the ballroom with a champagne glass untouched in his hand. His black hair was styled with deliberate restraint, not a strand out of place. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, a small imperfection that only made his face more memorable. Tattoos slept beneath expensive fabric, invisible to everyone who didn't already know where to look. His expression was neutral. Not bored. Not amused. Assessing. Men noticed him first. They always did. Bankers from Midtown glanced his way and subtly shifted their posture. Real estate developers paused mid-conversation when he passed, their voices lowering instinctively. Politicians, local, state, ambitious, clocked his presence and filed it away for later consideration. No one rushed him. You didn't rush gravity. Kaisung Sun didn't need to announce who he was. In Manhattan's quieter circles, his name moved faster than he ever could. He was the heir to the Sun family, an organization that had learned early that the smartest power was the kind that didn't attract attention. While the Italian syndicates argued over territory and headlines, the Suns controlled infrastructure, shipping routes, warehouses, logistics. Half the docks along the Hudson answered to companies that traced back, quietly, to his family. Korean organized crime didn't look like crime to most people. It looked like business. Clean paperwork, legal fronts, real estate portfolios so deep they distorted entire neighborhoods. The violence, when it happened, stayed contained, surgical, buried under layers of plausible deniability. The kind of operation that thrived in a city obsessed with appearances. Kaisung had inherited all of it at 23. Not because he wanted to, because his older brother hadn't survived long enough to refuse. Tonight, he was 28, and already tired in ways men twice his age couldn't articulate. Beside him stood Eric. Eric wasn't tall, or particularly intimidating. He wore his tuxedo like armor, borrowed for the night, uncomfortable but necessary. His hair was neatly combed, his expression alert, eyes always moving. To anyone else, he was an assistant, a business partner, a +1. In reality, he was Kaisung's lieutenant. Eric watched everything so Kaisung didn't have to. 50, Eric murmured, lifting his glass slightly as another woman passed by. Kaisung didn't react. They'd been counting for nearly an hour. The models moved through the room in waves, long legs, flawless makeup, gowns stitched by hands that charged more than most people earned in a year. Their smiles were precise, calibrated, each glance angled just enough to invite pursuit without appearing desperate. They were beautiful. Objectively, Kaisung felt nothing. He watched them the way he watched stock tickers or weather reports data without emotional weight. He'd grown up surrounded by beautiful things that wanted something from him. Admiration was currency. Desire was leverage. He'd learned early that attraction was often just hunger wearing perfume. His father had taught him that lesson in a different ballroom. Years ago, when Kaisung had been 16 and already being evaluated like a commodity, marriage proposals disguised as alliances, women introduced not as people, but as investments. That night had ended with raised voices and broken glass. Tonight ended with indifference. Across the room, a real estate magnate raised his glass toward Kaisung without approaching. Kaisung inclined his head once in response. Agreement acknowledged. Negotiations, complete without a single word spoken. That was how power worked at this level. Eric leaned in slightly. The shipping issue in Jersey? Handled. Kaisung nodded. And the zoning permits in Queens? Signed yesterday. No complications. Good. A pause. The Italians? Kaisung asked quietly. Eric's mouth tightened. Watching. Waiting. They always were. The old syndicates didn't like how quietly the Suns moved. Didn't like that their influence crept instead of announced itself. Didn't like that they couldn't provoke a public response. Kaisung didn't care. Let them watch. He took a slow sip of champagne. It tasted expensive and empty. Around them, laughter rose and fell on cue. Flashbulbs popped near the step and repeat wall, where donors posed for photos, arms around one another, all teeth and confidence. Somewhere near the orchestra, a senator's wife adjusted her necklace while pretending not to recognize the man who'd funded her husband's last campaign. This was the ecosystem. Predators wearing manners. Eric nudged him again. That one, he said, subtle but insistent. The one in silver. That's not a model. That's a tech founder's daughter. Could be useful. Kaisung followed his gaze. The woman smiled brightly when she noticed his attention, already halfway toward him. He looked away. Eric frowned. You're not even pretending tonight. I don't need to pretend, Kaisung said. That's not usually your style. Kaisung scanned the room again, not for women, but for exits, for patterns, for threats. Old habits never died. They just evolved. His father stood across the ballroom near a group of men who all leaned inward when he spoke. Older now, still sharp, still dangerous. His gaze flicked toward Kaisung briefly, calculating, then dismissed him just as quickly. Approval was a language his father rarely spoke. Kaisung didn't miss it. The orchestra shifted tempo, something slower. The lighting softened almost imperceptibly, as if the room itself had decided it was time for something intimate. That was when the crowd near the bar parted. Not dramatically, just enough. And through the opening, Kaisung saw movement that didn't fit the rhythm of the room. A waitress, black and white uniform, tray balanced easily on one hand, no jewelry beyond small stud earrings. Her hair pulled back into a low bun, natural, elegant, without effort. She moved with the kind of grace that came from repetition, not rehearsal. She wasn't looking for anyone. She wasn't trying to be seen. She was just doing her job. Kaisung's attention snapped to her instantly. Not desire, not curiosity. Recognition. Something about the way she navigated the room, how she adjusted her path before obstacles appeared, how she kept her posture steady without stiffness. It reminded him of himself, of survival, of someone who'd learned how to exist in spaces not built for them. He told himself it was instinct, the same instinct that kept him alive. She stopped near the orchestra, offered a champagne flute to a guest, listened to something said, and smiled. It lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds of unguarded warmth. No calculation, no angle, no expectation. Just a real smile. It hit Kaisung harder than any threat ever had. His body reacted before his mind did. Breath stalled. Muscles locked. The glass in his hand hovered halfway to his lips. Forgotten, the noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by a rush in his ears. His focus narrowed until there was nothing else in the room but her face, and that smile, already fading back into professional neutrality. Eric was still talking. Kaisung couldn't hear him. The waitress turned, weaving back toward the service corridor. Kaisung's feet moved without permission, carrying him forward through a crowd that parted instinctively, sensing purpose, even if they didn't understand it. She disappeared through a staff door, and just like that, the room came crashing back. Kaisung stopped in the middle of the ballroom, heart pounding, staring at a closed door like it had just taken something from him. Eric appeared at his side, disbelief written across his face. "Did you just—" "I didn't," Kaisung said automatically. Eric raised an eyebrow. "You walked past 50 women like they didn't exist and nearly ran down a waiter." Kaisung didn't respond, because for the first time in years, something in him wasn't empty. It was awake. "Find her," he said quietly. Eric blinked. "The waitress?" "Yes." "Kai." "Name? Schedule? Everything?" Eric studied him for a moment, then nodded. He'd seen that look before. The one that meant a decision had already been made. Kaisung turned back to the ballroom, to the chandeliers, the models, the power plays unfolding silently all around him. And for the first time that night, the entire room felt irrelevant. Whatever just happened had nothing to do with Empire, and everything to do with a smile that didn't belong in this world but had just changed his anyway. The service corridor behind the Waldorf ballroom smelled like bleach and warm metal. Naomi Clark pushed through the door with her shoulder, careful not to let the tray tilt as it swung shut behind her. The noise of the gala dimmed instantly, sealed away by thick walls designed to keep elegance contained. Out here, there was no orchestra, no laughter tuned to the right volume, just the hum of refrigeration units and the muted echo of footsteps moving with purpose. She adjusted her grip on the tray and kept walking. Black and white uniform, starched apron, sensible shoes, hair pulled back tight enough to stay out of the way but loose enough not to give her a headache by the end of the night. No jewelry, no perfume, no distinguishing features that might invite attention. Invisibility was a skill. Naomi had learned it early. You didn't survive places like this by being noticed. You survived by blending into the background, by becoming part of the furniture. Guests looked through her, not at her. To them, she was motion without identity, a hand offering champagne, a voice saying, "Excuse me," a body stepping aside just in time. Armor didn't always look like steel. Sometimes it looked like being forgettable. She moved back into the ballroom through another service entrance, the light shifting as she crossed the threshold. Warm gold washed over her face. Music swelled. The air thickened with perfume and money. She took her place along the outer edge of the room, scanning the crowd the way she'd been trained to empty glasses, wandering eyes, subtle signals from floor managers. Serve, smile, disappear. That was the job. She approached a small cluster near the orchestra and offered her tray. A man with a flushed face took a flute without looking at her. A woman adjusted her shawl and murmured thanks, already turning away. Naomi nodded automatically, her expression neutral. Practiced. Then someone said something she didn't quite catch. It wasn't loud, just a passing comment, half joke, half complaint about the music or the wine or the city. The words weren't important. The tone was. It was light, human, unguarded. Naomi looked up. Her eyes met his. He stood apart from the others, taller than most, dressed in black so precise it felt deliberate. His posture was relaxed but alert, like a man who never truly let his guard down. There was something watchful about him, something heavy, as if the air around him carried more weight. She registered all of this in a fraction of a second, and then she smiled. It wasn't planned. It wasn't useful. It wasn't for leverage or tip or advantage. It was a reflex. 3 seconds. That was all it lasted. A small curve of the lips, a softening around the eyes, the kind of smile that came from recognition rather than attraction, from one human acknowledging another in a room full of masks. Then it was gone. Naomi's face returned to professional neutrality. She inclined her head, stepped back, and moved on, already scanning for the next table, the next task, the next moment she would be needed and forgotten. She didn't look back. She never saw what that smile did to him. Across the room, Kaisung Sun stood frozen. Something in his internal calculus failed. His instincts, sharp, honed, rarely wrong, had always categorized people quickly. Threat, asset, liability, noise, background. It was how he survived, how he stayed ahead, how he remained in control. Naomi didn't fit. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't useful. She wasn't trying to be seen. And yet his attention locked onto her with the force of something dangerous. Not desire. Focus. The same focus that preceded violence. The same narrowing of the world that came before decisions you couldn't undo. Predator attention, misfiring. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't even know why his pulse had jumped or why the noise of the ballroom had dropped away like someone had shut off the sound. He only knew that the smile hadn't belonged there. It hadn't been calculated. It hadn't been empty. It had been real. And real things were rare in his world. By the time he moved, she was already gone. Kaisung took a step forward, then another, cutting through conversations that died mid-sentence as he passed. People turned to look at him, felt the shift, instinctively made space. Power had a gravity of its own. Eric noticed immediately. "Kai?" he called, confusion sharpening his voice. Kaisung didn't answer. He reached the spot where she'd been standing, eyes scanning the room, already reconstructing her exit. Service staff moved in predictable patterns. Doors used once were rarely used twice. He tracked the flow like a current, followed it toward the periphery. The service door was still swinging slightly. Too late. He pushed through anyway. The corridor was empty. No footsteps, no tray, no sign she'd ever been there at all. For the first time in years, Kaisung felt something close to frustration. Not anger. Loss. Eric caught up to him, breath slightly uneven. "You're chasing staff now?" She smiled. Kaisung said. Eric stared at him. "That's it?" "No," Kaisung replied quietly. "That's everything." Eric glanced down the corridor, then back at Kaisung. "You want her found?" "Yes." "How?" Kaisung's jaw tightened, carefully. He knew what this was becoming the moment the word left his mouth. A hunt, not the violent kind. Not yet, but a pursuit all the same. A narrowing of options, a shifting of resources, attention redirected from empires and alliances to one woman who didn't know she'd done anything at all. Somewhere in the building, Naomi Clark was finishing her shift, already thinking about subway schedules and sore feet, and the walk home through streets that didn't care who you were. She had no idea she'd broken something in a man who wasn't used to being broken. Kaisung stood in the corridor, listening to the distant music, the gala continuing without him. For the first time, power didn't feel like control. It felt like hunger. And it had found a name even if he didn't know it yet. The Brooklyn Cafe smelled of toasted bagels and bitter espresso, a sanctuary of warmth against the gray chill of early morning. Naomi Clark stood behind the counter, apron tied tight, hair tucked into a messy bun, and eyes half-lidded from 4 hours of sleep. The brass espresso machine hissed and spat in rhythm with the cafe's small but steady crowd, students clutching notebooks, delivery drivers in neon vests, a man in a wrinkled suit who clearly hadn't slept much either. Her body ached in places she didn't even know existed. 3 pairs of heels, 2 subway rides, 1 long night serving Manhattan's elite. Her legs were a map of pain and persistence. Still, she moved with the precision that came from years of survival. Pouring coffee, wiping counters, nodding politely, keeping invisible threads of control over a room she couldn't afford to lose. Naomi had 3 rules for surviving around wealth. 3 unbreakable laws. 1. Smile, but only the kind of smile that doesn't invite attachment. People with money loved to think they could buy hearts as easily as champagne. 2. Never take what was offered unsolicited. Tips, favors, attention, everything came with strings invisible to the naive. If it felt like a gift, it probably wasn't. 3. Keep your eyes moving. Watch everyone. Notice nothing too intensely. Blend. Be unremarkable, invisible, safe. These weren't lessons learned in classrooms. They were etched into her by necessity. Survival instincts sharpened on the edge of a city that devoured dreamers. And yet, this morning, Just before the cafe door chimed open again, Naomi's carefully calibrated world shifted. He stepped in. Kaisung Sun, the man she hadn't expected to see outside of the ballroom, outside of the glittering cages of Manhattan wealth, outside of the universe where people like him existed. Dark jeans, black leather jacket, hair still too perfect for someone supposedly up at dawn. He scanned the cafe, eyes narrowing until they landed on her behind the counter. Naomi froze for just a second. Her hands hovered over the espresso lever, heart skipping. "You were at the Waldorf last night," he said. Not a question. Statement. Her voice tightened, professional but wary. "Did I forget to give you your champagne?" "No," he said simply. His accent hinted at Korean roots, roughened by something deeper, a tonal gravity that made her chest tighten. "I wanted to see you again." Naomi swallowed, mind firing through the rules she'd lived by. Rule 1. Smile. Do it. Safe. Neutral. Rule 2. Never take anything. Okay, she could handle this. But the intensity of his attention wasn't part of any rule book. "You shouldn't be here," she said cautiously. This isn't where you belong." "I wanted to make sure that smile was real," he said, voice quiet but unrelenting. "The one I saw at the gala. It wasn't a performance, was it?" Naomi's breath caught. She hated being caught off guard, hated the way he seemed to read her, see her without permission. "It's my job," she said carefully. "I smile. It's what I do." "Not that one," he said. "That one. It wasn't for anyone. Not for the crowd. Not for Eric. Not for the cameras. That one was just you." Silence stretched between them. The espresso machine hissed. A milk frother whined. The city was waking outside, but inside, the world had contracted to the space between the counter and his chair. Naomi wanted to step back, wanted to disappear behind her apron, wanted to retreat to her carefully constructed invisibility. Instead, she found herself answering, "It's just, I can't do this with strangers. I don't know you." "I know," he said softly. And there it was again, the disarming honesty. No flourish, no charm, just truth, heavy and deliberate. "But I want to. And I promise, nothing about this will put you in danger." Her heart wanted to argue, to leap, to trust, to run. Instead, it palpitated. He didn't push, didn't lean closer, didn't make a move that would violate the careful distance she insisted on. He simply sat at a corner table, ordering coffee, waiting, watching. Naomi went about her tasks, hands trembling slightly, pouring cappuccinos, handing out bagels, pretending that the world hadn't shifted in the last 10 seconds. She kept glancing at him, noting how out of place he looked in this cafe, how deliberate every small movement seemed. Eric's words from the night before echoed in her mind. He would find her. He had the means, the persistence, the focus of a predator. And yet, she didn't feel hunted. She felt seen. It was terrifying. By the time her shift ended, Naomi had made her coffee and counted tips, her body moving on autopilot while her mind raced. She stepped outside into the cold Brooklyn air and found him leaning against a black Mercedes, untouched, waiting like he owned none of the streets but somehow belonged to all of them. "This is creepy," she said bluntly. "You showing up here at my work. It's stalking behavior." He held up his hands, expression open, sincere. "I know. I'm sorry. I had to see if that moment was real. If I hadn't imagined it." She crossed her arms, defensive and furious at the vulnerability she felt even as she tried to contain it. "Why? Why chase someone like me?" "Because you smiled," he said simply. And for the first time, Naomi didn't argue. Because she knew it wasn't flirtation, it wasn't charm, it wasn't manipulation, it was acknowledgement. Danger wrapped itself around that smile. Not because of what he was, but because she recognized how much power one glance, one gesture, could hold over someone who had the world at his feet. She was witnessing another side of power, the kind that came without money, without control, without family legacy, the kind that disarmed kings. She was terrified, and somewhere deep inside, she was intrigued. For all her rules, all her survival mechanisms, all the walls she had built around herself, Naomi Clark had just discovered a force she couldn't calculate, couldn't evade, couldn't ignore, and it had a name. Kaisung Sun. And he wasn't leaving. The Thai restaurant was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bodega, the kind of place that smelled of lemongrass, fish sauce, and sizzling woks. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting uneven shadows across the tables. Kai and Naomi sat in a corner booth, menus untouched. "Do you come here often?" Naomi asked, voice quiet, but her eyes scanning the room, as if every passerby might be a spy from his world. "No," Kai admitted, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea, heat radiating into his palms. "I wanted somewhere normal, somewhere I couldn't be mistaken for what I am." Naomi studied him. He didn't look like a crime boss here. He looked like a man trying to be smaller than his shadow, trying to exist quietly in a world that demanded spectacle. But she knew better. The weight behind his dark eyes said more than any leather jacket or whispered apology ever could. "Normal is a little relative," she said, letting a small laugh escape. "I'm usually juggling 3 jobs, 2 auditions, a class, and surviving on coffee and leftover takeout. This is normal for me." Kai's smile was soft, a little rueful. "I can see why you're so careful, why you hide, why you blend in. It's a skill, one I didn't inherit." Her heart tightened at that. He had power most people only dreamed of. He could move worlds with a word. Yet here, across from her, he seemed human, vulnerable, even. Naomi cleared her throat. "So, why are you really here? This isn't some wealthy guy fascination thing, is it?" Kai paused, considering. He had rehearsed versions of this speech 1,000 times in his mind, but rehearsed words felt hollow compared to truth. "I want you to see the other side of me," he said quietly. "The part I try to keep hidden, the part that hasn't inherited my father's methods. I teach kids martial arts, discipline, focus, gives them something to believe in, something to fight for that doesn't involve guns or debt or fear." Naomi blinked. Community centers? She hadn't expected that. Not from him. Not from someone whose presence alone reshaped rooms. Kai nodded. "I volunteer 3 times a week. You'll see." "If you want." She hesitated. She wanted to laugh, wanted to refuse, wanted to stay invisible forever. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Okay, show me." Later that afternoon, the sun glinted off dusty windows of the Queen's Community Center. Through the glass, children moved in practiced lines, kicking and punching under Kai's watchful eye. Naomi watched from the doorway, chest tightening. The kids didn't just follow his instructions, they respected him. They weren't afraid. Not in the way people feared him in Manhattan. They were inspired. Kai's voice was calm, patient. "Good. Focus on your balance. Eyes forward, chin up. Control comes from inside, not fear." Naomi's heart ached watching him, seeing this side of the man she had only known in flashes of danger and desire. This was real. Not a performance, not a calculation. This was him trying to be better, even with a legacy built on fear. After class, they sat on the steps outside. Sweat dried into his dark hair, a light sheen on his skin. He didn't speak at first, letting the children's laughter fade behind them. Then, quietly, "I've done things I'm not proud of, things I can't take back." Naomi swallowed, sensing the weight of his confession, the shadow of guilt he carried like armor. "I know what it's like to lose someone," she said softly. "My brother? He was caught in a crossfire when I was 21. He was 22. Never came home. I promised myself I'd never get close to that world again. To men who bring violence with them." Kai's hand found hers, tentative, almost afraid. "I understand." She pulled back slightly, not because of him, but because the truth of her own scars demanded distance. She had survived. She had rules. And yet, he was different. Back in Manhattan, Eric was keeping tabs. Surveillance cameras, whispered reports from contacts, even casual conversations in high-end restaurants all painting the same picture. Kai was obsessed. But obsession wasn't blind. It was measured, calculated, focused, dangerous in its own quiet way. "Kai," Eric warned over the phone, "you're crossing lines. You can't just pull someone from Brooklyn into your world without consequences. Her life, your reputation, your father." "I know," Kai interrupted, "and that's exactly why I have to do it right. Carefully. Nothing reckless. Nothing to endanger her. I won't risk her life because I want her. You understand?" Eric exhaled sharply. I understand. But her world, your father's world, it's colliding. And you don't know the half of it. Kai's jaw tightened. Then I'll learn. But she stays safe. That's non-negotiable. The day wore on. Naomi's routine shattered as subtle signs of surveillance made her pulse quicken. A man lingering a block away. A delivery van parked too long. Someone casually photographing the exterior of her apartment. Each sign reminded her that choosing to see him was no longer innocent. Yet, every time she thought about retreating, she remembered that corner of the ballroom where time had stopped. The 3 seconds of a smile that wasn't meant to be noticed. It was impossible. The tension wasn't just in the world outside. It lived in the spaces between them. Between desire and caution, trust and instinct, love and survival. Kai felt it too. Every call, every message, every observation he made about her routine brought a weight he hadn't anticipated. Love, he realized, was dangerous. But letting go? That was fatal. At night, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he stared at surveillance photos of Naomi moving through Brooklyn streets, reviewing the data Eric compiled. Every detail mattered: her schedule, her routes, her contacts, every potential threat noted. And yet, he couldn't restrain the longing that grew with every image. Her laughter, captured incidentally through street cameras, her focused gaze while taking orders, her tired yet determined walk along crowded sidewalks. Danger lurked behind every step, yet the pull was irresistible. Naomi, sitting in her tiny apartment, felt the pressure mounting too. Each subtle sign of observation reminded her that this connection was no longer simple. She'd chosen to see him, to allow herself to care, but that choice carried weight, and the shadow of his father was long and unyielding. Messages from unknown numbers, calls that went unanswered, whispered warnings from her roommates. The world she'd built around invisibility and control felt fragile, like a house of cards threatening to collapse. She gritted her teeth, reminded herself, survive first, protect what mattered. But the thought of him, of Kai, refused to leave. The collision of their two worlds, one built on vigilance, survival, and restraint, the other on power, legacy, and obsession, was inevitable. Every careful decision, every unspoken thought, every guarded glance pulled them closer. The tension wasn't just romantic, it was existential. Each step forward meant risking everything. Kai's father, unseen but omnipresent, loomed larger with each passing day. His network of control stretched into every corner of Kai's life, every business, every street, every potential danger to Naomi. The weight of family legacy pressed down, the consequences of love played against power, and both Kai and Naomi felt it, the pressure of a world that didn't forgive vulnerability, that punished the smallest misstep with life-altering consequences. Every heartbeat, every stolen glance, every small decision became a part of a larger battle. The collision of two worlds, two lives, two hearts that refused to remain untouched. What time is it where you're watching from right now? Comment below. I want to know who's staying up for Naomi and Kai's story. Kai's father's office was silent, except for the soft hum of the city below and the faint scratch of a fountain pen on ledger paper. The walls were lined with mahogany panels, shelves of bound accounts, and a single portrait of the empire's founder, staring down like a judge who had never learned mercy. The air smelled of aged wood, cigars, and the faint tang of something metallic that reminded Kai too much of blood. Kai stood near the window, gaze fixed on Central Park shimmering in the evening light. Behind him, his father didn't look up from the ledger. His voice, cold and precise, cut through the quiet like a scalpel. She's a liability. Kai stiffened. Who? Naomi. His father's eyes met his for the first time. Ice in the shape of a man. She is leverage, nothing more. If you continue, your judgment will endanger her. Do you understand? Kai's fists clenched. Leverage? You mean threaten her? That's insane. She's necessary. His father interrupted, voice even, surgical. She's everything you should not care about. Remove her from your mind, and this empire remains intact. Fail, and the consequences fall on her, not you. Kai's chest tightened. He could feel every syllable settling like a weight in his stomach. This wasn't about family loyalty. This was control. The cruel calculus of power, wrapped in his father's obsession with dominance. Later that night, Naomi's apartment in Brooklyn was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of a clock, the distant siren of a passing ambulance, ordinary sounds. masking danger. Two men arrived, dressed in sleek black suits, their demeanor calm, almost polite. They didn't break doors. They didn't raise voices. They didn't brandish weapons. They didn't need to. "Miss Clark?" one asked, holding a clipboard. "We have a message. From someone who cares for your safety." Naomi froze. Something in their tone, the smooth confidence of men used to being obeyed without question, set her nerves on fire. She had survived hustling through Manhattan's elite. She had rules. She had instincts. But this was different. This wasn't about money. This was about control. "They said," the other man continued, "that you must end contact with him. Immediately. Failure to comply may have consequences." Naomi's blood ran cold. The power in the room wasn't in violence. It was in inevitability. In a choice that had already been made for her, a future that could be dictated by someone else's hand. She stepped back, heart hammering. Her mind raced through possibilities. Call the police, run, hide, but each option was a gamble against men who knew her schedule, her habits, her life. Even the law couldn't protect her from the reach of this world. Her instinct, honed by years of survival and tragedy, screamed one thing: disappear, ghost, vanish, protect herself, and everyone she loved. "I understand," she said, voice low but steady, though inside, panic twisted like a storm. "I'll comply." The men nodded, unfazed. Their work complete, they left as quietly as they had arrived, leaving the apartment heavier than it had been before, as though the walls themselves now carried the weight of threat. Naomi's phone vibrated on the counter. She stared at it, hand hovering. She knew she had to act decisively. Survival demanded clarity. Heartache didn't matter here. She dialed Kai's number once, twice. It rang, then went to voicemail. Her fingers moved with trembling precision. She typed one final message, each word a scalpel cutting away everything she didn't want to lose, everything she had loved too fiercely. "I'm sorry. I wish things were different. Be safe, Kai." She hit send, then blocked his number. No further calls. No chance for him to argue, to plead, to convince her otherwise. Survival required sacrifice, and love had become too dangerous. Across the city, Kai's phone buzzed on the penthouse counter. He saw the message, read the words, felt the impossible weight of reality press down on his chest. Naomi's choice was clear. Her love hadn't faded. Her courage had dictated survival over desire. He tried to call. One ring, two, then blocked. Empty. Silence. The rage hit first, sharp and hot. Not for her leaving, but for the world that forced her hand. For a father whose empire demanded obedience over humanity. For a system that made love a liability. Then came the hollowness. A silence Kai hadn't felt since his brother died. The kind of emptiness that carved away pieces of a man until he wasn't sure what remained. He wanted to storm his father's office, wanted to break everything, to dismantle the legacy built on fear and control. But he knew the cost. Naomi's life, her safety, hung in the balance. Obedience became love in its cruelest form, letting her go to protect her. Kai stood by the window for hours, the neon glow from Times Square bleeding into the room. The city, unaware of the storm within one of its most dangerous families. He traced patterns on the glass with his finger, imagining her laughter, her smile, the small details he had memorized. Her absence carved itself into his routine, into his work, into the air he breathed. Every meeting, every business call, every attempt at normalcy was shadowed by her memory. He couldn't call, couldn't text, couldn't intervene. Love had become restraint. Obsession folded into discipline. Every fiber of him ached, but he obeyed, because her life mattered more than his longing. Even now, when the city slept beneath him, Kai knew one truth. He hadn't lost her. Not really. She had chosen survival over love. And that choice, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for what he would do next. Because when blood runs through your veins and legacy is carved in stone, letting someone go doesn't mean forgetting. It means preparing for the moment when you can finally bring them back safely, fully, without shadows. But tonight, there was only silence, the hum of the city beneath, and a man alone, staring at a message that ended everything he had begun to hope for. The betrayal wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was surgical, precise, the removal of possibility, the erasure of connection. Love had been severed with a text, and the wound was deep enough to scar a lifetime. Kai's father had won. For now, if you were in his shoes and your brother tried to kill you, would you let him live? Comment yes or no below. The city outside was still, drenched in rain, neon bleeding through the windows like streaks of molten color. Kai's breathing was loud, ragged, each inhale tasting of gun oil and fear. The barrel of the pistol pressed against his temple was colder than anything he had ever felt. Every second stretched into eternity. Move and you're dead. A voice hissed male, steady, professional, the kind that meant practice, experience, and absolute conviction. Kai's eyes flicked toward the shooter. Not a stranger. One of his father's old men. Loyal, trained, unhesitating, and yet, he hesitated. Kai knew the reason before it fully registered. It wasn't pity. It wasn't uncertainty. It was reputation. The stories of the Sun family, the whispered threats across Manhattan, the myth of Kaisung Sun, the invisible king who ruled not just with fists but with presence, had preceded him. The man holding the gun realized that killing him here, in this confined space, would trigger consequences worse than any court of law could mete out. Kai's mind raced, adrenaline and clarity colliding. You hesitate, he said quietly, voice steady despite the barrel pressing into his skin. I know what you're thinking. Fear of me? Respect? Loyalty? The gun didn't move, but the pressure eased infinitesimally. Kai didn't move either. His breathing slowed, measured, calculated. You're alive, the shooter said finally, words tight, clipped, but only because I respect the family name, only because you're not just any man. Kai exhaled. The safety clicked in his mind long before it did on the weapon. He had survived, not through cunning alone, but because reputation, the legend, had saved him. The moment broke, leaving a hollow in the room that hadn't existed before. Kai lowered his hands from the window ledge he had gripped, feeling the rain-slick glass cool beneath his palms. The city continued, oblivious, but inside this penthouse, inside this quiet apex of power, something fundamental had shifted. Fear. That insidious, consuming fear, fear of betrayal, of losing Naomi, of living a life dictated by violence, was no longer a distant threat. It was now real, palpable, and suffocating. It had nearly killed him, and he realized, with painful clarity, that it wasn't just fear for himself. It was fear that had poisoned everything he loved. The potential for connection, for happiness, for trust. Kai's eyes scanned the skyline, neon reflections fracturing across rain-slick windows. Naomi. Her face flashed in his mind, the smile that had upended his world, the way she had run, not from him, but from the danger he represented. Her absence was the shadow stretching across every move he had made since, the constant ache in his chest. He understood then that power without freedom, without love, without choice, was meaningless. His father's empire, the rules, the fear that had protected him all these years, they had created a gilded cage. And every chain in that cage was forged with the same hands that had tried to protect him. Kai's fingers brushed the edge of the window, rainwater dripping from the frame. He could rebuild. He could take control, not just of the empire, but of the fear itself, of the life he wanted to live, of the love he could have if he had the courage to claim it. The shooter lowered the weapon fully, eyes unwavering, but resigned. Loyalty and caution had done their work. Kai didn't move to seize it. He didn't need to. Survival wasn't about the gun anymore. It was about the clarity it forced him to see. Power shifts weren't always loud. Sometimes they were quiet, internal, seismic in their subtlety, and Kai felt the first tremor of change ripple through his chest. Fear had nearly killed him, but it hadn't. And now he knew what he had to do next. Protect what he loved, reclaim what he had lost, and finally, live on his terms. The city below continued its rhythm, oblivious to the man who had stared death in the face and emerged with more than survival. He had emerged with purpose. Kai's hand flexed, then clenched, and he whispered to himself, almost reverently, "No more running, no more hiding. It ends with me." The gun was still a threat, but it no longer defined him. He had seen the fragility of life, the sharp edge of mortality, and the futility of letting fear dictate his world. Naomi's absence, the betrayal, The shadow of his father, they were all part of the same lesson. Love and power must be earned, not caged. And for the first time in months, Kaisung felt the surge of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. Have you ever faced a moment where fear almost won? Comment below and share how you overcame it. The community center smelled of polished wood and sweat, a mix of effort and determination that was as grounding as it was familiar. The mats lay flat, the equipment neatly arranged, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the rays. Kai stood near the entrance of the dojo, supervising a small after-school class. The room was alive with energy, kids laughing, shouting, kicking, but his attention was fragmented, constantly scanning the doorway. 6 months had passed. 6 months of cleaning house, transitioning the family business into legitimate ventures, ending operations that had existed only in shadows. Yet every structural success, every investment and foundation had felt hollow. Nothing had mattered without her. And then she appeared. Naomi Clark stood at the doorway, silhouette framed by sunlight. Thinner. Yes, life in New York had been relentless but upright. Steady, strong. Her eyes met his across the room, and for a heartbeat, everything else faded. The kids, the mats, the echoes of training, the noise of Manhattan outside. Kai's chest tightened. He had imagined this moment endlessly, replayed it in quiet, haunted moments, always wondering if she would ever step back into his world. And now, here she was. The pause between them was heavy with unspoken truths, apologies, and the weight of choices made under duress. He didn't move immediately. The silence was necessary, a confirmation that this wasn't a dream, that she wasn't a mirage conjured by longing. Finally, Kai stepped forward, his usual controlled grace softened by relief and anticipation. "You came," he said quietly, voice low, reverent. Naomi's lips curved in a faint, tentative smile. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," she admitted. Her voice carried both exhaustion and resolve, a recognition that this time, she came on her terms. Kai didn't speak, didn't rush. He let her presence settle over him, absorbing her agency, letting her decision breathe. This wasn't a rescue. She had chosen to return. That alone carried more weight than any confession he could offer. They walked to the steps outside the dojo, the sun casting a warm glow over their reunion. Kai's hand hovered near hers, unsure if he should reach, then gently closed the distance, letting their fingers touch. It was deliberate, careful, and entirely mutual. Naomi's grip was steady, confirming that she was here of her own volition. "I wanted to see the real you," she said, nodding toward the center. "Not just the empire, not just the stories, not just the legend." Kai's gaze swept the room, at the children training under his guidance. "This is who I'm trying to be," he said quietly. "Everything else? That was the shadow I'm stepping out from." Naomi nodded, watching him with measured calm. "And I've learned to navigate shadows. But I don't need saving, Kai. Not then, not now. I need truth, clarity, partnership." He exhaled, letting relief wash over him. That was exactly what he was offering. No secrets, no manipulation, no coercion, just the reality of who he was and who he wanted to become. The weight of the past 6 months, the fear, the loss, the waiting felt like it drained from both of them in that shared silence. Words were unnecessary. Actions had spoken louder. His restructuring of the empire, his commitment to legitimate work, the centers for children, the stability he had fought to achieve. Naomi could see it, understand it, and trust it. "I'm here," she said finally, "not because I need protection, not because I'm afraid, but because I choose to be." Kai's eyes glimmered with emotion he had not allowed himself in months. Hope, gratitude, and love, tempered by the understanding that this was not possession, but partnership. "Then let's start over," he said. "No threats, no shadows, just us." Naomi's smile widened, full and real. "No promises about perfection, though," she teased, the first note of lightness between them in half a year. "I don't need perfect," Kai admitted. "I need honest. I need you. That's enough." For a long moment, they stood in silence, letting the bustling community center and the distant hum of Manhattan remind them that life was continuing beyond this singular, heavy pause. And yet, for them, the world had shifted. 6 months of separation, reflection, and survival had led to a moment of mutual understanding and choice, solidifying what neither words nor actions alone could have guaranteed. Kai's father, his empire, the betrayals, all of it receded into a background hum, powerless in the face of this reunion. Naomi's return was not a restoration of what had been lost, but the beginning of something intentionally built together, grounded in agency, trust, and shared commitment. And as they walked toward the center of the room, hands brushing, smiles tentative but certain, it was clear. The legend of Manhattan's invisible king was no longer defined by fear or control. It was now intertwined with love, respect, and a deliberate choice to build something beyond the shadows. Kai whispered, almost to himself, "This time, we do it right." Naomi's eyes met his. "Right," she agreed. Together, they stepped forward, into the sunlight, into possibility, into a future neither of them could have navigated alone, but which, now, they would shape together. Have you ever had to wait for someone or something 6 months to see if it was worth it? Comment below and tell us your story. And if you want more tales where love defies the odds, hit subscribe and join us for the next episode. The ceremony was small. No gilded halls, no crystal chandeliers, no parade of socialites vying for photographs. Just the community center where it had all begun, sunlight spilling through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the air like confetti. Naomi adjusted her simple white dress, Maya fussing with the veil, and for the first time in years, she felt fully present, grounded, seen, and whole. Kai stood waiting, tuxedo replaced with a tailored suit stripped of flash but rich in presence. His dark eyes were bright, softened by relief and love. The children from his taekwondo class lined the aisle, cheering, giggling, throwing petals clumsily, yet enthusiastically. Their laughter echoed through the room, a testament to the world they were shaping together, one of discipline, care, and community, rather than fear. When Naomi reached him, Kai's lips quirked in that rare, disarmed smile. "You smiled at me first," he whispered, voice low, carrying the weight of memory and promise. "And my entire world changed." Naomi's own smile mirrored his, soft and genuine. "You froze," she teased lightly, "and I fell in love with the man who saw me for real, not for pretense or performance." Their vows were quiet, intimate. They promised honesty over secrecy, partnership over dominance, love over fear. No grandiose declarations, just a mutual commitment to the lives they had fought to create. Every word carried history, the betrayals, the near losses, the months apart, the lessons learned. When they kissed, it was less a spectacle and more a seal on everything that had survived. Trust, agency, love, and choice. Around them, the children cheered louder, throwing petals into the air, and in that moment, Manhattan's invisible king, and the waitress who had changed him, felt the world shift beneath their feet. The legend was no longer one of intimidation and terror. It was one of transformation and possibility. Kai's empire had survived, but the man himself had evolved. The streets of New York whispered his name still, but now with respect born of restraint rather than fear. Deals were struck in boardrooms, foundations built for the youth, and centers opened to teach discipline, skill, and community. Power had a new definition: protection, creation, and legacy without violence. Naomi's presence was central to this new narrative, not as a damsel rescued, but as a partner whose choices mattered, whose agency shaped the man who once only knew control through fear. Together, they proved that love could coexist with power, that a world built on respect, rather than intimidation, could thrive. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light through the tall windows of the modest ceremony, Kai and Naomi stepped forward hand in hand. The city outside continued, but inside that room, what survived was timeless. Trust forged in danger, love tempered in absence, and a legacy built on courage and choice. Kai whispered again, almost to himself, "This is everything we fought for." Naomi squeezed his hand, "And it's only the beginning. If you believe love and courage can rewrite even the darkest legacies, like this video, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more stories where hope triumphs over fear." In the end, it all began with a single smile, a moment so small, so fleeting, that it seemed inconsequential, and yet, it unraveled a carefully constructed empire of fear, control, and expectation. Kaisung Sun, a man whose life had been measured in power, influence, and obedience, discovered that a single genuine gesture could bypass all the armor he had built. Power, as it turned out, was fragile. It could command ships, dictate markets, and intimidate rival families, but it could not command the heart. Men like Kai's father spent lifetimes forging empires, believing strength was the ultimate currency, only to realize that fear and respect are not the same as love, and in their wake, they leave hollow victories, empty offices, and cold champagne untouched. Love, on the other hand, required vulnerability. It demanded risk. It asked for honesty when deception was safer. And for Kai, it meant choosing her over the legacy he had inherited, choosing hope over fear, and, ultimately, rewriting the rules of a world where the strongest men once ruled by terror. Naomi's smile didn't just stop him, it transformed him. It reminded him that life, however entangled with power and danger, was worth living fully and loving without compromise. The visual fades to the empty Waldorf ballroom, lights dimmed, chandeliers reflecting faint, ghostly glimmers, and rows of untouched champagne flutes. The stage where so much ambition, performance, and deceit once played out now lies silent. The models, the whispers, the deals all gone. What remains is the echo of that smile, the moment when everything changed. Kai walks through the room alone, feeling the weight of what he inherited and the lightness of what he chose. Every decision, every risk, every sacrifice, all of it was measured against her, against the possibility of something real. He closes the doors, and the world outside continues, indifferent. But inside him, there is a quiet certainty that love, even in the most improbable places, is the legacy that survives. And as the camera pulls back, showing Manhattan's skyline glittering against the night, the narrator leaves one final thought. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions are not waged with weapons or money, but with courage, truth, and the bravery to see and be seen. Where are you watching from? What's the weather like there? And if you want more untold stories like this, subscribe.